The stars had always been kind to humanity. For 300 years, humans traveled between worlds, built colonies on distant planets, and made friends with dozens of alien species. They became known as the peacemakers of the galaxy. When two species fought, humans would step in and help them find common ground. When a planet faced disaster, human ships would arrive first with food and medicine. Commander Ho had spent 40 years as a diplomat. His hair had turned gray, and his face carried the lines of countless negotiations. He stood in the observation deck of Earth's orbital station, watching cargo ships move peacefully between the stars. Behind him, a soft voice spoke. "You look worried," said Doctor. She was the chief scientist of Earth's Defense Research Division, though that division had not done real work in over a century. There was nothing to defend against. The galaxy was at peace. Ho turned to face her. "The Empire sent another message today. They want us to give up our colonies in the Outer Rim." "And what did the Council say?" "What we always say. We offered to negotiate. We invited them to discuss trade agreements, shared resources, mutual benefits." Ho shook his head slowly. "They refused, again." They were different from other species. They were tall, powerful beings with 4 arms and skin like dark stone. Their entire culture was built on conquest. For 1,000 years, they had taken what they wanted through force, but they had never attacked humanity. Perhaps they thought humans were too weak to bother with. Perhaps they were waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a Tuesday. Ho was eating breakfast when the first alarm sounded. He dropped his cup and ran to the command center, where dozens of officers stared at screens with pale faces. Admiral stood at the center, his jaw tight and his hands pressed flat against the table. "Show me," Ho said quietly. The main screen flickered to life. It showed a planet called New Sol, home to 60 million humans. It was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green forests. Children played in its parks. Families sat down for dinner in its cities. Then the ships appeared in the sky, hundreds of them. They hung above the planet like dark clouds, and then they opened fire. The bombardment lasted 4 hours. When it ended, New Sol was burning. The oceans boiled. The forests turned to ash. 60 million people died in a single afternoon. But they were not finished. 2 more colony worlds fell that same day. Prime. Station. Together, over 200 million humans died, mothers holding their children, fathers trying to protect their families, old people who had lived peaceful lives, young people who had barely begun to live at all. They broadcast their attack across every frequency in the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see, and at the end of the broadcast, the Emperor appeared on screen. He was massive, even for his species, with golden armor and eyes like burning coal. "Let this be a lesson," the Emperor said, his voice rumbling like thunder. "The humans are weak. They talk of peace because they cannot fight. They offer friendship because they fear war. Today, we have shown the galaxy what happens to the weak." He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Humanity will surrender within the week, and when they do, they will serve the Empire forever." The transmission ended. The command center was silent. Ho stood completely still. His face showed no expression. His eyes were fixed on the screen where the burning planets had been displayed. Around him, officers wept. Some prayed. Some simply stared in shock. Admiral approached him slowly. "Ambassador, what do we do?" Ho did not answer immediately. He was thinking about something he had not thought about in many years, something from humanity's past, something dark and terrible that they had buried long ago. "Contact Doctor," he said finally. His voice was calm, but there was something new in it, something cold. "Tell her to unseal the archives." His face went white. "The archives, you mean?" "Yes," Ho turned to face him, "all of them." Across the station, Doctor received the message. Her hands trembled as she walked to a vault that had not been opened in 200 years. The door was thick metal, covered in warnings and seals. She pressed her palm against the scanner and spoke the authorization code that only 3 people in the galaxy knew. The vault opened with a hiss of ancient air. Inside were files, thousands of files, Project Prometheus, Project Nemesis, Project Extinction Protocol, weapons that humanity had built during their darkest days, weapons so terrible that humans had sworn never to use them again. They had buried these secrets and chosen peace, hoping that war would never force them to remember. The had made them remember. That evening, Earth's Emergency Council gathered. Leaders from every human world appeared on screen, their faces marked by grief and rage. The Galactic Council had already sent messages urging humanity to surrender. Other alien species offered their condolences but no help. Everyone expected the humans to accept their fate. Admiral stood before the council. He was an old soldier from a forgotten age, one of the last who remembered what humans were truly capable of. His voice was steady as he spoke. "They believe we are weak," he said. "They believe we chose peace because we could not choose war. They are wrong." He looked at each face on the screens. "We chose peace because we remembered what we did to ourselves in the ancient wars. We chose peace because we were afraid of our own power. We built weapons that could crack planets, erase fleets from existence, and end entire species. And then we locked those weapons away because we never wanted to become monsters again." He paused. "But our children are dead, our worlds are burning, and the enemy is laughing at our graves." The council chamber was silent. "I ask for authorization," continued, "to wake the Silent Armada." No one spoke. The Silent Armada was a legend. 10,000 warships hidden in the asteroid fields of the solar system, ships built for one purpose only, not defense, not protection, absolute destruction. Commander Ho stood up. His voice carried across every screen. "They chose this," he said simply. "They killed our people and laughed. They broadcast our suffering as entertainment. They called us weak." He looked directly into the camera. "Now they will learn why the galaxy should never make humanity angry." One by one, the council members voted. The result was unanimous. Deep in the asteroid fields, lights began to flicker. Engines that had been cold for centuries started to warm. Weapons systems that had slept for generations came online. The Silent Armada was waking up. And across the galaxy, the Emperor sat on his throne, completely unaware that he had just made the worst mistake in the history of his species. 48 hours had passed since the attacks, 48 hours of grief, anger, and preparation. The Earth Command Center had not slept. Officers moved between stations with red eyes and tight jaws. Coffee cups piled up in corners. No one spoke more than necessary. Director Hana stood before the main communication array. She was a small woman with short black hair and a voice that could reach across star systems. For 20 years, she had broadcast messages of peace and cooperation, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, friendship between species. Today, she would send a very different kind of message. Commander Ho entered the room. He carried a single sheet of paper in his hand. His handwriting covered both sides in neat, careful letters. He had spent the entire night writing those words, choosing each one like a weapon. "Is the broadcast ready?" he asked. Hana nodded. "Every frequency is locked in. Military, civilian, government. When we transmit, every single in their empire will hear this." "Good." Ho looked at the paper once more. "They wanted the galaxy to see our suffering. Now the galaxy will see our answer." In the corner of the room, Lieutenant Na prepared the recording equipment. She was young, barely 25, and she had never seen war before the attacks. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the settings. She had lost her parents on Prime. Her entire family was gone in a flash of weapons. She wanted them to pay, and today they would learn that payment was coming. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the station, Doctor presented the unsealed files to the military council. General Dong Ho sat at the head of the table. He was the oldest human in the room, over 130 years old, kept alive by advanced medicine. He had fought in humanity's last great war, centuries ago, before the peace. He remembered what humans could do when they stopped holding back. Project Prometheus, Doctor said, pulling up the first file. Orbital strike platforms carrying focused energy weapons. Each lance can cut through a capital ship like paper. We have 1,500 of them in storage. The generals stared at the specifications. Some of them had never seen weapons like this. They had studied diplomacy, trade, logistics. War was something from history books. Project Nemesis continued. Gravity bombs. Each one creates a temporary black hole that lasts for exactly 3 seconds. Everything within 50 kilometers is crushed to atoms. General Dong Ho nodded slowly. He remembered testing those weapons on dead moons. He remembered watching mountains collapse into nothing. And finally, said, her voice dropping, Project Extinction Protocol. The room went very quiet. Automated war systems, self-replicating attack drones, AI-controlled fleets that do not stop, do not negotiate, and do not show mercy. They were designed for one scenario only, the complete destruction of an enemy species. One of the younger generals spoke up. We actually built these things. Dong Ho answered without looking up. We built them during the dark times, when we almost destroyed ourselves with war, when we decided that if any enemy ever pushed humanity to the edge, we would have the tools to push back. He finally raised his eyes. We hoped we would never need them. We sealed them away and chose peace instead. And now, the general asked. Dong Ho's face was stone. Now we unseal them. Back in the communications center, everything was ready. Commander Ho stood before the camera. Behind him, the Earth hung in space, blue and beautiful and full of 7 billion people who were watching their screens in silence, waiting for their leader to speak. The red light turned on. The broadcast was live. Ho did not shout. He did not cry. He spoke in a calm, steady voice that was somehow more frightening than any scream. To the Empire, this is Commander Ho speaking on behalf of all humanity. He paused for a moment. 3 days ago, you attacked our colonies. You killed 200 million of our people, families, children, innocent lives that had never raised a weapon against anyone. You burned our worlds and broadcast our suffering as a show of strength. His eyes were cold. You believe we are weak. You believe we chose peace because we could not fight. You laughed at our grief and called us soft. Another pause. You are wrong. He held up the paper and began to read. For 300 years, humanity has walked the path of peace. We built bridges between species. We healed wounds left by ancient wars. We became the diplomats, the healers, the friends of all who needed friendship. And you mistook this kindness for weakness. What you do not know is why we chose peace. We chose it because we remembered what we were capable of. We remembered the ancient wars when humans killed humans by the billions. We remembered the weapons we built to end those wars. Weapons so terrible that we swore to never use them again. We buried those weapons. We silenced our rage. We became gentle because we understood the monster that lives inside us. We knew that if we ever released that monster again, we would not be able to control it. His voice dropped lower. You have forced us to release it. This is humanity's final message to you. We gave you every chance. We offered negotiation. We offered peace. We offered friendship. You responded with murder. You responded with destruction. You responded with laughter. So hear this clearly and remember every word. We are not surrendering. We are not negotiating. We are coming. Every ship we own is preparing for war. Every weapon we sealed away is being activated. Every soldier who chose peace is now choosing something else. You wanted to see what happens when humanity gets angry. You wanted to know what we become when we stop being kind. Now you will see. When our fleet arrives in your space, there will be no warning. There will be no second chances. There will only be consequences. You chose war. You chose to murder our children and burn our homes. You made this decision, not us. So brace yourselves, because humanity is coming, and we will not stop until you understand exactly why the universe should fear the wrath of a peaceful species that has been pushed too far. The transmission ended. Across space, the message played on every screen. Soldiers stopped their training. Workers looked up from their machines. Citizens gathered in public squares to watch the humans speak. The emperor watched from his throne room, surrounded by his generals. When the message ended, he laughed. It was a deep, rolling sound that echoed off the walls. "They think words will frighten us," he said. "They think speeches will save them. Bring me more wine. The humans will surrender before their fleet even leaves their system." But one of his advisors did not laugh. An old named who had studied human history for decades. He had read about the ancient wars. He had seen the records of what humans did to their own kind before they chose peace. "My emperor," he said quietly, "I think we have made a terrible mistake." The emperor waved him away. "Nonsense. They are merchants and diplomats. They do not know how to fight." Looked at the floor and said nothing more, but his hearts were cold with fear. Because he knew something the emperor did not. Merchants and diplomats do not build weapons that create black holes. Merchants and diplomats do not design machines that can crack planets in half. Merchants and diplomats do not seal away doomsday devices unless they once had a reason to build them. Humanity had not lost the ability to fight. They had simply been trying very, very hard not to. And now they had stopped trying. The asteroid field around Saturn was the most forbidden place in human space. For 200 years, no ship had been allowed within 1,000,000 kilometers of it. Children were taught that it was dangerous, full of unstable rocks and radiation. Scientists said it was a protected research zone. The truth was much darker. Engineer Sung Ho had worked in secret military facilities his entire life. He had maintained systems that officially did not exist. Now, at 60 years old, he was finally seeing what he had spent decades protecting. 10,000 warships floated in the darkness. They were massive. Each one was the size of a small city. Their hulls were black as space itself, covered in weapons that had no names in any public record. They had been built during humanity's last great war, designed to end that war forever. When peace came, they were brought here, shut down and hidden away. "Begin awakening sequence," Sung Ho said into his communicator. One by one, lights flickered to life across the silent armada. Engines that had been cold for centuries began to warm. Power cores that had slept for generations hummed with new energy. The ships were waking up, like ancient giants rising from the deepest sleep. Sung Ho watched with tears in his eyes. He had hoped this day would never come. He had hoped humanity would never need these monsters again. But 200 million dead demanded an answer. Across human space, similar awakenings were happening. On Mars, pilot Mira received her orders. She was 60 years old, retired for decades, living a quiet life growing vegetables in a small dome. She had been one of the greatest fighter pilots of her generation, but that was ancient history. She had not touched a combat ship since she was 30. Now she stood in a hangar looking at her old fighter. It was called the Ghost, a small, fast ship designed to move through enemy lines like a shadow and strike without warning. "They rebuilt you," she whispered to the ship. "They kept you ready all this time." A young officer approached her. "Ma'am, we need you to train the new pilots. We have 300 volunteers, but none of them have ever seen real combat." Mira nodded slowly. "How much time do we have?" 14 hours before the fleet launches." It was not enough time. Not nearly enough. But Mira had trained in worse conditions during the old wars. She had learned to fight when fighting seemed impossible. Get them in the simulators, she said. No breaks, no food, no rest. In 14 hours they will either be pilots or they will be dead. Let them choose which one. On Earth, Sargent walked through rows of new soldiers. They were young, most of them. Farmers, teachers, artists, engineers. They had never held weapons before the attacks. Now they wore armor and carried rifles, their faces pale with fear and determination. Was old, very old. He had served in the ancient wars before the peace, before humanity decided to become gentle. He remembered what real combat looked like. He remembered the screams, the blood, the friends who died in his arms. He had hoped he would never have to teach anyone these lessons again. "You are afraid," he said to the soldiers. His voice was rough but not unkind. "Good. Fear keeps you alive, fear makes you careful. The soldiers who are not afraid are the soldiers who die first." He walked among them, looking into their eyes. "But you are also angry, I can see it. You lost people in the attacks, family, friends, lovers. That anger is a weapon, but it is a dangerous one. If you let it control you, it will get you killed." He stopped at the center of the formation. "Here is what I need you to understand. We are not going to war for revenge. Revenge is satisfying, but it is stupid. We are going to war because if we do not, they will attack again. They will kill more of our people. They will never stop until we make them stop. So we fight, not for anger, not for hate. We fight to protect everyone we have left. We fight so that no more families will burn. We fight so that when this is over, humanity can go back to being peaceful again." He looked at them for a long moment. "Now, let me teach you how to survive." In the deepest vault on Earth, Doctor stood before the extinction protocol controls. Admiral was beside her, his face grim. Around them, dozens of technicians worked at screens, preparing systems that had not been active for centuries. "The automated fleets are ready," one technician reported. 10,000 drone carriers, each containing 500 combat units. Total strength, 5 million autonomous weapons. Nodded, her hands were steady but her heart was not. These machines had no mercy. Once activated, they would hunt and destroy until no enemy remained. They could not be reasoned with. They could not be called back. "Admiral," she said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Did not answer immediately. He stared at the screens showing the drone fleets, row after row of deadly machines waiting for orders. "I watched the footage from New Seoul," he finally said. "I saw children running through the streets as fire fell from the sky. I saw mothers trying to shield their bobbies with their own bodies." His voice cracked slightly. "I saw what they did to us." He turned to face directly. "I hate these weapons, I hate what they represent. I hate that we ever built them. But I hate what they did more, so yes, I am sure." Entered the activation code. Deep in space, 5 million war machines opened their eyes for the first time in 200 years. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species shouted over each other, trying to understand what was happening. The ambassador, a small being with silver skin, stood on her chair to be heard. "This is madness," she cried. "The humans are peaceful, they settle disputes, they do not start wars. What is happening?" The representative, a tall creature covered in thorns, shook his massive head. "You do not understand, little one. The humans did not become peaceful because they were weak. They became peaceful because they remembered what they were." "And what were they?" They looked at her with ancient eyes. "Monsters. Beautiful, terrible monsters who almost destroyed themselves with war. When they finally stopped fighting, they had weapons that could crack planets and technology that could erase entire species. They chose to bury all of it and become kind instead." The silver face went pale, and now they have made them dig it all up again. Aboard the flagship Horizon, Captain Bai stood on the bridge. She was young for a captain, only 32, but she had trained her entire life for this moment. The Horizon was the largest ship in the Silent Armada, 5 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that had no names. Behind her, through the massive observation window, she could see the rest of the fleet forming up. 10,000 warships, moving into perfect formation. It was the most terrifying sight she had ever seen. And it was also the most beautiful. "All ships report ready," her navigator announced. "Hyperspace coordinates locked in. We can launch on your command." Bai nodded. She thought about her grandmother who had lived on New Sol, a kind old woman who made the best soup and told the best stories. She had burned along with 60 million others. "Send a message to all ships," Bai said. Her voice was calm and clear. "Weapons hot, formation tight. We do not stop until it is over." She took a deep breath. "Launch the fleet." 10,000 engines roared to life. The silent armada leaped into hyperspace, leaving trails of light across the darkness. They would arrive in space in 17 hours. And when they arrived, the universe would learn why humanity had tried so hard to stay peaceful. The defense fleet was the largest military force in the known galaxy. 50,000 warships gathered in formation around the capital system. Each ship was the size of a mountain, covered in weapons that had conquered 100 worlds. The warriors aboard them had never known defeat. Grand Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Conqueror. He was the most decorated soldier in history, with 100 victories carved into his armor. He watched his fleet with pride and confidence. "The humans are coming," he said to his officers. "Let them come. We will crush them and add their skulls to our collection. This will be a battle the galaxy remembers forever." His officers roared with approval. They had seen the human fleet on their scanners, 10,000 ships, large but still outnumbered 5-1. The humans were fools to challenge the might of the Empire. But old advisor stood in the corner, silent and worried. He had studied the human archives. He had read about their ancient wars. He knew things that Admiral did not want to hear. "My Admiral," said quietly, "perhaps we should consider retreat." The humans spun around, his eyes burning with anger. "Retreat? You speak of retreat when we outnumber them 5-1. You are a coward, old one. After this battle, I will have you executed for your weakness." Bowed his head and said nothing more. But his hearts were cold. He knew that numbers did not matter when one side had been restraining itself for 300 years. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace. For a moment, nothing happened. The two fleets faced each other across the void. 50,000 warships against 10,000 human vessels. It looked like a mismatch. It looked like an easy victory. Then the first Prometheus lance fired. A beam of pure white light shot from the horizon and struck the Conqueror, the most powerful warship in the fleet, home to 50,000 warriors, defender of 100 worlds. It split in half like paper being torn by a child. The two pieces spun away and exploded in a ball of fire visible from the surface of the Grand Admiral died, without even understanding what had killed him. Before the debris settled, 300 more lances fired. 300 ships died in the same instant, not damaged, not disabled, destroyed completely. 1 second they existed, the next they were scattered atoms. The fleet tried to respond. They fired their weapons, launched their fighters, attempted to close the distance for close combat where their numbers would matter. But human weapons did not follow the rules that understood. Gravity bombs detonated in the center of their formations. Spheres of absolute darkness appeared, 3 seconds of impossible crushing force. Hundreds of ships were pulled together and compressed into balls of metal no larger than a fist. Thousands of warriors died without firing a single shot. Quantum missiles erased ships from existence without explosions. One moment a cruiser was there, fighting and firing. The next moment it was simply gone. No wreckage, no survivors, just empty space where a ship used to be. Captain Bai watched from the bridge of the horizon as the fleet dissolved. She felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a cold, hollow sense of purpose. Target their command ships first, she ordered. Then their carriers. Leave their escape pods alone. We are not here to slaughter the helpless. Understood, her tactical officer replied. Enemy fleet at 40% strength, 30%, 20%. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 6 hours. At the end, the mighty defense fleet was gone. 47,000 ships reduced to atoms and debris. The greatest military force in the galaxy had been erased in a single afternoon. But the human fleet did not stop. They descended on military bases. Orbital stations that controlled defense systems were destroyed with surgical precision. Weapons factories were reduced to rubble. Training facilities were vaporized. Every military target was eliminated with terrible efficiency. Not a single civilian was harmed. Human weapons were precise enough to destroy a military base and leave the city next to it untouched. They could kill every soldier in a fortress without breaking a window in the nearby homes. They had thought humans were weak because they were precise. They had mistaken surgical strikes for inability to cause destruction. Now they understood. Humans could destroy everything. They chose not to. That was the difference. The emperor watched from his palace as his empire's military might vanish like morning fog. His hands shook. His great stone face was pale with something he had never felt before. Fear. Real fear. A hologram flickered to life before his throne. Commander Ho stood in the projection, still calm, still steady. Behind him, the horizon's bridge was filled with quiet, focused officers doing their duty. Your fleet is gone, Ho said simply. Your military is ash. We are in orbit above you right now. Our weapons are pointed at your cities. The emperor tried to speak, but his voice came out as a whisper. Then finish it, destroy us. Is that not what you came for? No. The single word hung in the air. We are not you, Ho continued. We do not murder civilians. We do not kill those who cannot fight back. We do not laugh at the suffering of the innocent. His eyes were hard as stone. That is the difference between us. You could never understand it before. Perhaps you can understand it now. The emperor's legs gave out. He fell to his knees before the hologram, surrounded by his terrified advisors. What do you want? He asked. Anything, I will give you anything. Here are our terms. Ho's voice was ice. You will disarm completely. Every warship will be destroyed. Every weapon will be dismantled. You will never build military vessels again. You will pay reparations to every family that lost someone in your attacks, every child who lost parents, every parent who lost children. You will pay until the debt is settled, however long that takes. You will surrender all territory taken by conquest. Every species you have enslaved will be freed. Every world you have stolen will be returned. And you will broadcast a confession to the entire galaxy. You will admit what you did. You will admit why we responded. You will tell everyone that you chose this path, and we simply followed you down it. The emperor's head hung low. And if we refuse? Ho leaned forward slightly. If any vessel ever raises a weapon against humanity again, we will return. And next time there will be no terms, no negotiation, no mercy. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. You have seen what we can do when we restrain ourselves. If you force us to stop restraining ourselves, there will be nothing left of your species but a warning to others. The emperor was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. I accept your terms. Ho's expression did not change. Then it is over. Your war is finished. Our message has been delivered. The hologram flickered and vanished. In the throne room, silence reigned. The greatest empire in the galaxy had been broken in a single day. Their fleet was dust. Their pride was shattered. Their emperor knelt on the floor like a servant. Old advisor finally spoke. I tried to warn you, my emperor. I tried to tell you what the humans really were. The emperor did not raise his head. What are they? Looked out the window at the human fleet hanging in the sky, dark shapes against the stars. Beautiful, terrible, unstoppable. They are what we should have been afraid of all along, he said quietly. They are a species that chose to be kind despite having the power to be cruel, and now we know what happens when someone forces them to stop being kind. He turned away from the window. We were never fighting merchants and diplomats. We were fighting warriors who decided to become merchants and diplomats, and when we killed their children, we reminded them what they used to be. The Emperor finally looked up. His eyes were empty, broken. Then we never had a chance. Shook his head slowly. No, my Emperor, we never did. 5 years passed. The galaxy had changed. Not through conquest, not through war, but through a simple lesson that every species had learned on the day humanity stopped being gentle. The Empire was no more. It had been reorganized into the Protectorate, a peaceful territory under human supervision. Their warships were gone, melted down and recycled into hospitals and schools. Their weapons factories had become farms and research centers. The great warrior culture that had terrorized the galaxy for 1,000 years was slowly learning a new way of life. It was not easy. Generations of had been raised to believe that strength meant destruction, that power meant conquest. Unlearning those beliefs took time, but the humans were patient teachers. They did not punish them for their past. They did not humiliate them or treat them as slaves. They simply showed them a different path and waited for them to follow it. Some resisted at first. They spoke of rebellion, of restoring their empire's glory, but those voices grew quiet quickly, not because humans silenced them, because others did. They had seen what humanity was capable of. They had watched their fleet vanish in a single day. They knew that rebellion meant extinction, and they chose survival instead. The Galactic Council had been rebuilt. Humanity now held a permanent seat at its head, not because they demanded it, but because every other species voted to give it to them. The message was clear. If anyone threatened the peace, humanity would respond, and no one wanted to see humanity respond again. Ambassador Ho did not sit in that seat. He had refused all titles and honors after the war. Instead, he retired to a small colony world called New Hope, built by the survivors of New Soul. He spent his days teaching children about diplomacy and conflict resolution. He planted a garden and watched things grow. One evening, a young journalist came to interview him. She wanted to know about the war, about the final message, about the day humanity reminded the galaxy what they were capable of. Ho invited her to sit in his garden and poured her tea. "People call you a hero," she said. "They say you saved humanity." Ho shook his head slowly. "I did not save anyone. 200 million people died before we acted. I was too slow, too hopeful that they would choose peace." He looked at his hands, old and weathered by years. "I waited too long because I did not want to believe that war was necessary. That delay cost lives." "But you won." "We won the war." He set down his teacup. "We did not win anything else. War is not victory, it is failure. It means all other options have been exhausted. It means people will die. It means families will weep." He looked at her directly. "We built those terrible weapons because we knew that someday we might need them, but needing them is not something to celebrate. It is something to mourn." The journalist was quiet for a moment. "Then why did you write the message? Why did you tell them to brace for consequences?" Ho's eyes grew distant, looking at something far away. "Because they needed to understand. They thought we were weak. They thought our peace was cowardice. If they believed that, they would never stop attacking. They would keep killing our people until we were gone or until we fought back." He paused. The message was not a threat. It was a warning. One last chance for them to turn away. But they did not. No, they did not. So we did what we had to do. He picked up his teacup again and took a long sip. "That is the burden of power. When you are strong enough to destroy your enemies completely, You must also be wise enough to know when destruction is necessary and when it is not. They had no such wisdom. They destroyed because they could, not because they should. We tried very hard to be different. Across the galaxy, Doctor stood in the vault of last resort. She had returned to seal the extinction protocols one final time. Around her, technicians carefully shut down systems and locked away weapons that should never be used again. She had designed a new lock for the vault. It required the unanimous agreement of every human world to open. Even one vote against would keep the weapons sealed forever. It was her way of making sure that humanity would never act in anger again. Only if every human agreed that there was no other choice would the weapons be released. "Do you think we will ever need them again?" one of the technicians asked. Stood before the final door as it slowly closed. "I hope not," she said quietly. "I built my entire career on the belief that peace was possible, that we could solve problems without killing." She watched the door seal shut with a heavy sound. "But I also know what happens when someone kills 200 million of us. I know what we become." She turned away from the vault. "So we seal the weapons away. We try to be peaceful again. We hope that no one is foolish enough to test us." She paused at the exit. "But if they are foolish enough, we will be ready." Admiral had disbanded the Silent Armada. The 10,000 warships had returned to their hiding places in the asteroid fields, powered down and sleeping once more. But they were not destroyed. They were not dismantled. They were simply waiting. Stood on the observation deck of Earth Station, watching the asteroids drift peacefully in the distance. A young officer approached him with a cup of coffee. "Sir, why did we not destroy the fleet? If we are truly peaceful now, why keep the weapons?" Took the coffee and sipped it slowly. "Because peace is a choice, not a destination. Every day we choose to be peaceful. Every day we choose not to use the power we have. That choice only means something if we actually have the power to make a different choice." He looked at the young officer. "If we destroy the weapons, we become weak, and the weak cannot choose peace. They can only accept whatever the strong decide to give them. But if we keep the weapons and still choose peace, that means something. It means we are strong enough to destroy our enemies and wise enough not to." The officer nodded slowly. "So the weapons are a reminder." "Yes, watch the stars. A reminder to us that we must never become like our enemies, and a reminder to everyone else that we could become like them if we wanted to." Captain Bai had left the military. She commanded a new fleet now, the Diplomatic Corps, ships that carried no weapons and traveled across the galaxy bringing aid and friendship to all species. She had visited 100 worlds since the war, helping rebuild what they had destroyed, bringing medicine to the sick and food to the hungry. Every species she visited treated her with absolute respect, not because she threatened them, because they remembered what her people had done. They remembered the footage of 50,000 warships dissolving in the darkness. They remembered the final message that had echoed across every frequency. They remembered that humanity had chosen to be merciful after winning, and they knew that mercy could be withdrawn if it was abused. On the 5 years after the war, a young child sat in a classroom. Her teacher, an old one named, was explaining history to the class. He had survived the war and now spent his days teaching the next generation. "Teacher," the child asked, "why does everyone in the galaxy respect the humans? They seem so kind, so gentle." Paused for a long moment. He remembered the war. He remembered the Emperor kneeling before the human hologram. He remembered the fleet burning in the sky. "Because, little one, the kindest beings are often the ones who understand cruelty best. They have looked into the darkness and chosen to walk in the light instead." He looked out the window at the peaceful city below. "The humans could have destroyed us completely. Instead, they rebuilt our schools, healed our sick, and taught us a better way of living. That is true strength." The child thought about this. But what if someone attacks them again? Looked at her with ancient eyes. eyes that had seen too much and understood too well. Then the galaxy will learn the same lesson we did. Never mistake peace for weakness. Never mistake kindness for inability. And never, ever force humanity to send another final message. He returned to his teaching, and the child listened carefully. Outside, the sun set over a world that had once been ruled by warriors. Now it was learning to be ruled by wisdom. And somewhere in the distance, hidden among the asteroids of a distant solar system, 10,000 warships slept peacefully, waiting, hoping they would never be needed again. But ready, always ready, just in case. Because that was the lesson humanity had taught the galaxy. Peace was precious. Peace was beautiful. Peace was the highest goal any species could achieve. But peace only lasted when someone was strong enough to protect it. And humanity had proven, once and for all, that they were strong enough. They hoped they would never have to prove it again. But if they did, the galaxy knew what would happen. The message had been delivered. The consequences had been shown. And no one would ever forget.